Okay, wonderful. Let's get started. I'm super, super excited about this conversation. Maybe you're all some of my favorite people in the industry. I've known you personally for a long time. I consider you friends. You've been major supporters of the work that we've been doing at Tailbook from the early days. So, huge thank you now that I have you all in one screen. This is really nice. And then also, I was really, honored that you guys wanted to be part of our 8-week webinar series. We could have not timed the series any better. We had actually scheduled it before COVID hit, and it just sort of worked out really well that we could transition the discussion online and really be part of that conversation. And then hearing the progression from all of you over the 8-week period was also, I think, a lot of interest for everyone in our community. And the feedback from the 8-week series was just incredible, overwhelmingly positive. So there's a lot of gem, and the purpose of the 8-week webinar was to talk about the importance of data to the digital transformation, and giving tools to our community so that everyone is able to build a business case to invest in data. And what we've reviewed through the webinar series is that this one assumption in procurement is that in my view, software was going to fix data. And we're seeing, and more than ever with COVID, that it's not the case. Software companies are not data companies. And so having a good data strategy and a data foundation is really critical. And we provide a lot of data points. So just for anyone who's missed the 8-week webinar series, I highly encourage you to go on our YouTube channel, download the ones that you want to listen. They're all fantastic. And then this is just today a recap, hearing your perspective on the webinar series, some of the key learnings. And then I think in our previous discussion was like, what now? Like, what happens from now on? And you're all coming at this with different, unique perspective, from being on the customer side to be working with customers directly. This is my daughter. I am working from home. I did have this speech before, but this is, it's live. So there's certain things I gave up control. So no further ado, let's kick this off. The first question that we had today, and I think we could probably talk about some of those questions for the entire 45-minute, is some of your key learnings, and I'll go around from the 8-week webinar. So why were you excited to participate? What are some of the key learnings? And just before, as a sort of a side note to everyone else, if you have any questions, we'll keep the Q&A for the end. We'll give 15 minutes, and the format, you can post your question in the question box. So if you don't want to forget about it, we'll go through those, and then we can also unmute you if you raise your hand in the Q&A so that you can speak live to our panelists. Okay, so let's kickstart. I'd like to start with Chris. Again, just sort of what made you want to be involved in that 8-week webinar series, and what are some of the key learnings from the message that carried through the webinar?
Yeah, sure. Like Stephanie, I'm working at home too, and I'm just hoping my dogs don't start barking while we're having a discussion here. But you know what? One of the things that I thought was unique is that the session, it was unique because it was a series of I'll call it interconnected webinars. I haven't necessarily done that before. Typically I'll participate on a webinar. It's on a specific topic for a specific time, and that's it. And one of the things I likened it to is sort of like, I don't know, a lot of folks watch these series on Netflix, and, it all built on each other. And so I thought that was unique in terms of, the 8 weeks that you went through this, that, there was all these different perspectives over time, and there was some building associated with it as well. But in terms of, some of the things that, as I look at the 8 weeks, and, I had an opportunity to review some of the sessions last night as I was putting some thoughts together for the the time today. There's a couple of things. Obviously there was a lot of focus on data, and I think if you listened to any of the sessions, one of the things you would have walked away with was that data is foundational. And one of the things that I think was mentioned by several of the folks during the various sessions was this sort of interplay between software and data. And in some ways, I think it might have been Jeff or Matt, made the comment that, data becomes sort of the enabler and sort of the grease that keeps everything else going. And so really just creating this data lake, something that, Dr. Epstein talked about as well. I think some of the other things that that were interesting over this period of time is that, we talked about experiences as well. I think a lot of times when people look at supply management, looking forward and even where we are today, and it's certainly something that we've done at the Hackett Group for a long time. We've looked at things in terms of the investments you make in the organizations and these capabilities. We also look at the value that we're delivering, but it's also the whole idea of the experience that we're creating. And, as part of that experience, there's this whole environment that we're actually building. And so the idea, and you can actually take a page out of what Amazon has done. I mean, many of these organizations, they started with experience first and say, let's create the right experience, for those stakeholders, for the business, et cetera, and then we'll make it as efficient and effective as possible, going on. One last thing that I would say was, quite interesting, and this really came through in the conversation that again Dr. Epstein was having. And it's something that I've talked about, for a bit of time, was this idea of an application. I use the term plug and play. And as we look going forward, seeing more of an environment where you have various capabilities. And I always look at it, I said, it's sort of like, I'm going to bring up my phone here. I have, my phone here, and I have all these various apps here. One of the things I give an example is I have multiple weather apps. I don't just have one. But, it's really, as you think about that kind of environment, and this is where we start thinking about where are we headed, is really one of these environments that it becomes more of a plug and play. We're not necessarily as worried about the interconnectivity between these various applications, but we're really looking at, what do we really need to go do? And I have various options, potentially in an environment where I, pay and rent those particular applications for the time that I need, and then turn it off when I don't need that. So there was some really interesting types of things that we talked about, and I think lastly, I said the last thing was last, was just the whole focus on agility. I think everyone, made that comment that, when we think about agility, it is something that we absolutely have to think about how we build that in our organizations going forward. And when I look at agility, it's really two things. One, it's not only, being able to be reactive and responsive to, current events, et cetera, but it's also the predictive capability. How do we get ahead of the curve as well? And certainly, data foundations become very important as we start thinking about building that predictive capability within our organizations.
Thank you, Chris. And in terms of the analogy that you give, you often give the Iron Man analogy of, the man being procurement and the suit being the technology. And what we talked about is the data being the arc reactor to that. Like, how do you power your technology stack with a good, strong data foundation? I like that image.
Yeah, that's actually, and I know that, Tim and Dr. Epstein talked about that, and some of the other speakers as well. It isn't just about the technology, it's the blending of the two. And how do I enable that? I mean, we have a lot of great talent in our organizations, and that's changing over time, but how do we enable that? And, I think it was Jeff that made the comment that, there's certain things that the human mind does very well. And that, when I forgot, he had in his presentation, he showed something being designed, but it didn't necessarily come out by a computer very well, because computers think differently than the human mind. And so when you think about that, you can bring those two together, it becomes very powerful.
Yeah, and Chris here is referring to Jeff Peddle, our CTO, who did one of the webinar series you can watch on YouTube. And the feedback on that, it was sort of the best description of AI and machine learning in the context. It was not specific to TL book, but it gave a really good overview. So I'm gonna go to Dr. Epstein for your thoughts.
Call me Eloise, please.
I was so formal about it. I felt like I need to be formal too.
No.
Well, I'm working on my doctorate, and about all the work that I'm going through to do that, I'm thinking maybe I will have people call me doctor. So
well, there's a lot of people.
3 more years to go.
So actually, I like what Chris said about interconnected webinars. This, in retrospect, was perhaps the most brilliant idea ever, because I've watched each week, and I just think, oh my gosh, these are all like seamless, and they all work together, and it's a story. It's a cohesive story. It's awesome. And I've loved each week. And actually, normally I don't read the comments or I'm skeptical of the comments, but actually the comments were some of the best engagements I've seen on anything. And it's very productive and very, I gleaned a lot from the comments. So, and I actually gleaned that there's a lot of passion around this, a lot of passion around data and a lot of passion around procurement. And those that follow my work say, you know, I'm really bullish that now is the greatest time to be in procurement. And every time I read the comments, it just kind of, and this idea of an interconnected webinar series is like, yep, this is just proving my point. And this is just, it's not something I would have hypothesized, but as I watch this unfold and was part of it, it's like, this is great, because I don't see this in the supply chain area. I see some interesting things, but not this kind of community, this kind of cohesive and this engagement. And I think that, you know, like, to build on that, I'll just make two other points. One is, it's doable. And I know we're going to get to a question, but like, data is doable. And I've made that argument, but also I've listened to the other speakers. I've read the comments, and my collective takeaway is data is doable. And which gets to my thing that I will just say that, you know, there are no more excuses, and this series proved that, right? It's not just me saying that. There's evidence in each of the weeks that say that this is doable. So there's no more excuses.
There is absolutely no excuse. You're right, but I do think the community still needs the tools to understand how to build the business case for it, right? I think that, and we've talked about this, the ROI stories and the use cases become endless when you have good data, but you still have to make this really tangible to your leadership team and to get the budget and be able to communicate that internally. So, yeah, so good thoughts. And Tim?
I'd echo both what Chris and Eloise said. For me, it was the interconnection was excellent. I think the different lenses that everybody brought to the story, and I think obviously how it turned out, you have to be pretty ecstatic, I think, with how the different lenses came together. But, you know, my lens is a little different than Chris's lens, a little different than Eloise's lens, a little different than the others. You know, Tealbook trying to, you know, solve problems for clients and customers. So I think when you brought, and then just the basic understanding for folks who haven't thought about how to, you know, what the challenge is and how to maybe do it and how it's built and how you guys try to figure out how to understand customer demand for a better data, better quality data, more data, to make things go that people want to try to do. I think that was, you know, how it came together was very interesting to me. For me, as I try to lead, and from a practitioner's point of view is where I spend most of my time. I think, you know, and I've worked, I sit on ISM Thought Leadership Council with you and Eloise, and we have great debates. But from the advisor's view, you know, I always appreciate, you know, an honest opinion about things, and that's always my favorite part, with passion. Like, here's how what we're seeing, and that's, you know, when Eloise says, if I look at dozens or hundreds of clients, here's what I really see happens. And for me as a practitioner, I want to tap into that, and I think that's what I got. As always, from Eloise. And Hackett, I've worked and invested in Hackett products, and, you know, in terms of being, you know, here's what data is, and here's how you're doing compared to everybody else. I think from the lens of you know, of a best practice leader in data like Hackett, and saying, how am I, as a practitioner, I want to know where am I aiming, and how big is that gap, and how do I get there? And when it comes to the topic of this foundation that makes everything else go, which is what data is. However you look at it, you're focused on supplier data. There are at least a dozen other cuts of data that we need to work to be able to drive a function and drive value. And I really like I like the way that Chris looks at the world. So I think, you know, when putting it all together, I hope it was valuable for folks watching. My lens is a little different in terms of what really needs to happen, what really happens in a corporate environment when you're competing for resources and have to perform and have to deliver the value and have to use all these, you know, all of the great ideas. And I echo Eloise. I mean, there's so much dialogue in LinkedIn about, you know, in this space, and you know, we're all trying to work and pay attention to the fast moving conversations, but definitely a lot of passion as well for this. So I appreciated that.
And as we talked about in our prep discussion, the playbook has changed so much in the last few weeks alone, right? Nobody knows. And so sharing best practices and having the opportunity to hear from you who are engaged with a lot of different procurement teams going through different challenges and some of the same challenges is really key. And we'll continue building that thought leadership and sharing best practice. So I'm going to actually, since you, Tim, threw that as a first question, is when we look at the next 6 to 18 months, like what now? What does the future look like, and what should procurement teams really focus on?
So my perspective is a little bit direct. I think it's as I agree, and I said this in my session. I agree with this team here that like this is the time to be in procurement. If you want to add value, if you want to make a big impact in your company, in your space, this is the time to do that. Unfortunately, I strongly believe that there are a lot of leaders and most talent that are not prepared for what is happening. But as we settle out of some of the early surge and settle into a new normal, and then a new normal that's going to form over the next 6 to 18 months and carry for the rest of the decade, the speed at which the business needs help, the expectations that the business is going to have of the function, or the opposite of you being a function is CFO finds way to automate you out because there's no value or no perceived value. So I think we're on this precipice now that you have to figure out very quickly how to do a lot more with a lot less. The resources are harder to get. The easy money is gone to invest in things, or the proof you have to provide to say my investment in Tealbook is a good investment, my investment in Ariba is a good investment. There's no wishful thinking here. There are almost, it appears to me, unlimited providers trying to solve problems in the marketplace that can help us. And the scrutiny over those decisions have never been higher, but the speed at which you need to move has never had to be faster. So there's this confluence of things that it takes a certain type of leader, a certain type of team to be able to understand how to navigate all that and make good decisions quickly, serve the business at the same time as lower the cost of your function and improve the effectiveness of your function. So I see this, I had the first and second order effects in the economy on our businesses, on the starting with the customers and record unemployment and customer, when we think about what is the future customer behavior going to be and what is it really going to settle out as, what are people going to want to do, what are they not going to want to do, and what is that going to mean for business? We need to get ahead of that as a function. We have the most data at our fingertips if we know what to do with that. It's knowing what to do with it, how to make meaning of it, how to leverage partners to do it faster if we don't have the in-house capabilities to do that, and start adding value now, even if it's small, and build that momentum. I think there's just so much to figure out. So I look at, I think it's the VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. That's our world, and not everybody performs well in that. So we got to focus on our leaders, on our teams, and figure out how to make meaning of the data that we do have and how to improve it.
I'm seeing Eloise nodding, and I'm hoping you guys just jump in, right? So that I've been in conversation with you guys where we had some good debate. So don't, I'm being a bit formal about letting you speak, but please jump in.
Eloise, tell me it's all crap what I just said. That's what I want.
No, I think that's right, and I would take that to the next level, right? Is in practical terms, you got to set up an MVP factory because that's the only way you're going to get the business case and the ROI on the short term, because dollars are scarce. And I'm not sure if I said this or this is sort of kind of evolved since I did my thing, is that nobody's going to spend $5 or $10 million on an Ariba or a Coupa implementation. Doesn't mean they're not worthwhile investments, although I think you all know how I feel about that. But I think like that there's going to be very few dollars for procurement. So you're going to have to be creative. I think and I've said this, if you look at the 100+ vendors out there, all the pricing models are different. And I think that's a reflection that's going to further, stratify as we go forward. So I think you're absolutely right, Tim, that it is all going to be about what we can do now to create savings now. I think, though, that tees up something that that I think two things are happening, and I've really seen this in the last few weeks, is that it's okay, we've over-indexed on cost at the expense of risk. So now we're going to go swinging wildly back to get a full visibility into risk, which I would argue that we need to do. But we also have to make sure that we don't over-index, because I can already see it. I can just see everybody just out that way. And so I think it's finding that balance, and it's going to be hard collectively to find what that center is. And because at the same time, and back, Tim, to your point about what are the consumers doing and wanting, I think it's not going to be, we can't lose sight of CSR, right? And sustainability in particular, because if we've learned anything in the last week, that social issues matter, right? And in addition to Black Lives Matter, right? And so you knew I was going to say that, right? So so I think that you can't be disconnected from what's happening in the world and corporate social responsibility. So if we have cost on one end of the spectrum and risk on the other, like that center has to be anchored around CSR. And I think those three factors are absolutely going to influence the next 6 to 18 months.
We're seeing that customer centricity, you know, I'm hearing it a lot. How do you, actually, Tim, you talked about is how do you build the function based on your customers, external customers and internal customers, and we work back from there. And our consumers are asking for, you know, local supply chain, have much more transparency, and how do we respond to that? And the other point is around, you know, risk, but then how do you take action, right? It's one thing to know risk, but then how do you build planning around taking action and allow people to respond to those market changes and those risks as effectively and as fast and as well as possible.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I just pick up on, I'll say one other thing, Tim, is this whole idea of automating and the CFO just kind of automating you. And I've made this point. It's like, well, you know, you have to think of value beyond cost. So sorry, Chris, go ahead.
No. I mean, I would, you know, one of the things that Eloise, you mentioned is this whole balance and, you know, the swing from, you know, cost. And as you look at the way that we've architected our supply chains, you know, a lot of them, and you know, as part of the challenge that we have, that they are located in certain parts of the world, and you have an undercurrent right now occurring, you know, where there are some, you know, considerations in the U.S., you know, with the potential movement away from China, et cetera, and just an attitude. And so, you know, just even over the last several weeks, I've had clients come to me and say, listen, we're not looking to move out of China, but how do we start de-risking it? You know, because we don't know where that attitude is going to be in the U.S. You know, we want to look at some stuff more nearshore. Obviously, there are things that we're bringing back because of, you know, pharmaceuticals, for example. But this balance is really what's going to be important. And we've designed things primarily around a very heavily weighted objective around cost. And, you know, what you're seeing is not just the balance with risk, but it's also the balance with agility. You know, the ability to pivot more quickly when something does happen. And so I think we're going to see much more balancing and a more weighting to the risk and the agility, but cost is not going to go away. I think the other thing that, you know, as I look at this, as you asked about the next 6 to 9 months, you know, one of the things that, you know, what was interesting, we just completed a study, and it was a survey looking at supply and demand management. And, you know, one of the things we asked about was digital transformation, and, you know, what do we think people's efforts going forward? You know, one of the things that we saw, and we certainly saw vulnerabilities exposed in the current environment over the last couple of months in a number of different ways. We saw purchase to pay processes breaking down. And I saw more of that. And again, I go back to this, the stress that we put our organizations under was quite extreme. And typically we built processes to deal with an environment that had some variability, but not to the level that we've experienced over the last, you know, couple of months. You know, I saw organizations, you know, specifically, you know, potentially companies that were working on the vaccine that needed a significant increase in the velocity by which they were doing things. and the processes that they put in place were just breaking down too slow. And so they reverted back to, really basically manual processes, re-engage with P cards, et cetera, just to be able to get stuff in the kind of time frame and not utilize the sort of archaic processes that they put in place. And so a lot of that stuff is all being, rethought. So as I look over the next 6 to 9 months, one of the things that organizations are going to be doing is really looking at and saying, what vulnerabilities were exposed during this period of time? Where do we have holes? How do we rethink of this? But the other thing that was interesting in this study was, 77% of the organizations highlighted that they will be increasing, or I'll say accelerating at a moderate or high level, their digital transformation efforts looking forward. And I think the one thing it did expose is that we did see a difference between organizations that had gone through some of these efforts versus not. And I'll just say some of the success in different dimensions as we went through this period of time. I think the last thing is the whole focus on intelligence. I think a lot of folks, they look at people, process, and technologies, they look at their organizations. And, the piece of, really looking at data and where does data fit into this whole thing? And more than data, I call it intelligence. Where does that fit in? What is your intelligence strategy for the organization? And how does that sort of couple with all of these other pieces? And it doesn't mean, intelligence has to come in through the data itself. It's the people that you have, et cetera. And so how do you build this intelligence quotient, within the organization and build that as you look forward? Because it becomes, a significant piece of that model, as you look forward. So
let me bring to life your story about what you just said, Chris, about archaic processes. First off, one of my learnings, because I know that's one of the questions coming up, is that all of our best-in-class processes just got exposed for being, completely inadequate at best. But one of them is the whole rigid purchasing process, right? And so we were engaged in the height of the crisis, which I guess is still going on, but we were engaged with a client and they asked for our help finding PPE. And so we scoured and we came up with some, and we said, hey, here you go. And we found this, and I swear the CPO said, well, that's more than we typically pay for that. And I need to get approval for that. And so like 24, 48 hours later, they're like, all right, well, go ahead and buy it. We'll go ahead and buy it. Well, it was long gone.
It was gone. Yeah.
Right. So I mean, it's like, I mean, you can infer that. It's just,
I think tangibly, Steph, I mean, we often talk about things everybody already agrees with and knows. I think one of the things is, from a leadership perspective, I would encourage folks to do, and when you look at the question, this in the next 6 to 18 months, you have to get closer than ever to your business, because their worlds are changing very rapidly right now, and understand what, if you think about them as the customer, and if you can predict and keep your eye on or your finger on the pulse of what's going on around your business with your customers, and get force yourself closer to the business leaders that you have to serve, and understand how their priorities are changing, what is their world, and what value is going to mean to them, and align to that quickly. So I think you have to completely revisit the rest of 2020 work plan or business unit plan strategies, things that matter, and what you're measuring and what performance is going to mean. And then the 2021 planning, which for some companies is starting already. What does that world look like? You have get it. Going down a transformation path, which I live in transformation, or even just regular day-to-day operations, you need to do that for both. And figure out what you need to do to pivot in the right now and for the next 6 to 12 months as this unfolds. And what is the range of options? Like, you get really good at sort of the scenario or the sensitivity analysis to say, okay, as we look at the number of businesses that are kind of down and out. What do I predict a range of outcomes are going to be? And again, the skill sets that are not sort of core traditional procurement, in my mind, traditional procurement skill sets in terms of forecasting and planning and understanding the customer and communicating and really partnering with the business very proactively in these times, the importance of that is just escalated. So I think in terms of tangible actions, they should all be around how do I understand that business and position my function to best serve what value means. So as Eloise said, it's going to be pretty quickly. Everybody over indexes to risk and they're saying, wow, that's really expensive. I have to get back to something in between. What does that mean in the business, and how do I position my function to best serve that? I think you got to get really specific and detailed and understanding what they want and need, and figure out how to do that.
I think, and I'll add to that because apparently I like adding today. But I think we put so much effort, at least in the best practices, traditionally into SRM and supplier relationship management, and I think from a skill point of view, business stakeholder management is woefully lacking. And I think I made the point that you also need to treat legal and finance and HR as stakeholders too, because they're ancillary, they're part of the procurement process, and a slow moving legal department can crush procurement's productivity. And so I think probably the skill there that, Tim, I would add to that is the ability to look at all your relationships and quote unquote manage them in a cohesive way, or a strategic way, maybe even.
Yeah, I think, as you talk about that, and, it's the complexity of all those relationships, because as you think of stakeholders, certainly they're the ones that are internal to the organization. And Tim, you were referring to the senior, the business leaders, I would say the top of the house. We're talking about our functions. We're also talking about third parties as well. Suppliers have a stake in these capabilities that we create. And, the challenge has always been is that these stakeholders aren't always unified in what they want, out of this capability that that you build for the organization. And, one of the terms that I use, and I think this goes, Tim, to some of the things that you said on your session several weeks ago, was the whole area around, you talked a lot about alignment. And one of the things I, focus on is what is that real objective of this supply management capability that organizations build. And a lot of times I like to say is that we built things, we sort of built them within the four walls of the organization itself, and we push them out to the organization whether they like it or not. This is what we do. 7-step sourcing methodology, here it is. And it really is all about business enablement. At the end of the day, you can measure yourself in all kinds of ways, but are you enabling the business to be successful? And I know what it takes to enable a business to be successful. The business is going to have to help you understand that. And so that kind of drives how we build these organizations to do that. But they have to be done in a way that are agile, because those requirements, those needs, that just like you talk about the current environment, right now you talk about, and I forgot which one of you mentioned that, next 6 months we got to really relook at the business. Has it changed? Has how we go to market, how we will compete, it changed? If it has, what do we have to do now differently to enable their success?
It comes to leverage. I think that how you have, sorry, Steph, we'll let you one more. The skill it takes as team members and leaders in the function and team members to understand how to create leverage. So if you have, how do you leverage the internal functions that you need to move you along? How do you leverage suppliers the right way? How do you leverage data? How do you improve it? It's this range of trade-offs that people are not used to having to make, and you have to make them really quickly right now. I think you find different individuals with different skill sets really struggling with that right now.
I think people are scared. I was at this event in Europe several years ago, and there was this author. It didn't have to do with supply chain, but there was an author that was talking about, and I forgot. I forgive me for not knowing, who the person was and all that type of stuff. But the whole purpose was this individual had gone around and spoke to all the senior executives, as well as like leaders of countries, prime ministers, et cetera, across Europe. And what they were looking at is, really looking forward. And one of the comments this individual would say is that, it took about an hour until they warmed up. And, as a leader, I'm supposed to be, confident. I'm supposed to feel like I have the control of the situation. But what he found was that as he was talking about these individuals and a lot of these things that are unfolding, is that they were scared. They did not know what to do. And I think that's the, as you sort of peel back, some of this, I think some of us, and, we just don't know what to go do in this current environment. A lot of times we're applying, I'll say, playbooks that we've used for many, many years to the current situation. And it is, to me, it's more uncertain looking forward than it has been. And, this is why I keep on talking about agility, because you have to have capabilities, but because you don't know, you have to have that agility within the organization. And we're going to have to make decisions that, we're going to have to balance, the thing that we're talking about before, risk, cost, et cetera. To allow for more agility, it may cost us a little bit more as an organization to have that ability to pivot versus, just having certainty. Because if I have certainty, anybody can build a model. It's when I don't have that it becomes very difficult.
That's how you get automated out. If you apply an old playbook to the new problems today and it doesn't, you don't understand the customer, you don't understand the value that you have to add or what they're trying to achieve, and it doesn't work, that's completely exposes the function. And that's where it's like, okay, there's no value here. I just want to buy my stuff. And okay, there's no strategic capability here. See you later. I think that is a massive threat to the procurement function in a lot of organizations right now, is trying to take old things and apply them to this situation. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, and you see that happening in the environment. It's something that we're comfortable with. And unfortunately, I'm sure you guys see it as well. I mean, you see some of these organizations where they're reverting back and saying, you know what, it's all about cost, and really looking, because they don't understand, they're pulling out the old playbook and saying, let's go execute against that. And, again, you take a function that may have made, 2 steps forward only to take a step back now.
When I define agility, to me is having access to information and putting that information into the hands of as many people as possible to allow them to adapt to market changes. If you can truly build an enabling procurement function, I think it was a CPO Cisco, to me, success of procurement is to have a fully digitized function where people are able to make decisions with no friction, right? So, but it comes back to data, and it comes to the third question is, we all know, and I think you've all said this in our earlier discussion, is we all know data is a problem. At every conference, I ask who here, has confidence in the quality and the completeness of their supplier data. I'm not talking about transaction or even spend data. I'm talking about data, the completeness of the information that you need to know about your suppliers, because everything you do in supply chain procurement ties back to your suppliers. And everyone laughs. Everyone looks around, nobody raised their hands. And if you ask, raise your hand if you believe that good data is absolutely critical to your digital transformation, everyone raise their hands. And if you ask them who here is invested in a cloud-based S2P or P2P solution, the 3/4 will raise their hands. And I think it always lands to me in this perfect, sort of, there's no more to say. But what we can do is help navigate how do we fix this? We all recognize data as an issue. We laugh about it because it's been such a monumental task in the past. I'd say impossible to do. But how do we go about it to, one, fix it and give the tools to people to know how to fix it and how to use it properly to then, do all the things that we're talking about today?
Well, Steph, I do a lot of one-on-one briefings with CPOs or workshops with their teams. That's my opening line, right? I use the same thing, and I challenge, but I go right after them. I assume they have bad data and let them push back, and they don't push back. And then I just basically go from there and challenge them and keep challenging them and tell them that that's not acceptable, especially when there are tools, which is why I always use Tealbook as an example. And again, if you go back and look at the history of my presentations over the last 2 years, that's one of the examples I use, because there is no excuse, right? You should not have bad supplier data at this point. That is I don't care how many ERP systems you have. I don't care where you onboard or offboard or whatever. There's just no more excuse. And at the risk of sort of repeating myself, again, I cannot emphasize, if all you do is, like we were just talking, is cost savings, and eventually I can automate the cost savings, right? So what are you going to do? You're going to do 3 things. Well, you're going to do either expand the scope of coverage that procurement has on your spend, because oftentimes there's certain categories procurement doesn't have. And you're going to do that through supplier intelligence, right? Either suppliers you have or suppliers you don't have and should have. The other thing you're going to do is supplier innovation and CSR. And all of those future-looking functions of procurement are 100% going to be fixated on how good is your data. And not just have I cleansed and harmonized, my records. It's what kind of enrichment is in those records and how up to date is it, and so forth. So
I think it's easy to say, Eloise, and this is one of these things. There's a theory. It's a bit of it's absolutely true. There is no excuse, but the reality is everybody's starting with crappy data. So regardless that there was no excuse, we're in the current reality that how do I deal with, when I look at data, supplier data is one thing, product and profitability, material master, service master, a spend, what all the data that we need to be able to run a good function and to help ensure that our users, our internal customers make quality decisions day in and day out, and that and it's all of the things you would want in their hands they have. You just don't have enough, you don't have enough time, and you don't have, and as I said in my thing, sorry, take a step back, your systems are continually creating bad data because it is this if you have to go in an order, there's no magic light switch to flip and it's like, okay, everything is generating great data. We have this pool of great data that's flushing out the crappy data. It is a monumental task to try to do that. And that's where you have, in my mind, a good investment to make, if we say it's foundational, I don't know why I did that, is who can you partner with that has the tools and has the talent to help you do that? Because you can't do it all on your own, but it's such a battle to know what order do you do things in, what resources do you put in, because you have multiple conflicting objectives and things you're supposed to be trying to do, all of which need good data. You spend a lot of time cleansing to do those things, but there is no magic switch here. You need a part, like for what we're doing now, we partnered with Tealbook to help on the supplier data side. On material master data, we're going to have to do something else. On the product level data, we're working with another advisor. Like, you need horsepower with skills to help you with this, and it's it's just the easiest thing to not invest in. That's why we're here. So,
but
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I've got a material master recommendation for you, but
Okay,
but I think the problem is that everybody's attacked it the wrong way. They try to do it upstream first and either consolidate the number of ERP systems or fix it upstream, where what you get is this complete, it's like walking through taffy. Right, because you get all these people that are, giving you, they're putting roadblocks. And so if you do what like Tealbook has built and others and Material Master, is you take it out, you build the data lake, and you work with it to show how, and I'll say quickly and easily, and I don't really mean those terms because it's never quick, it's never easy, but how logically it can happen. And then you can start to then feed it back upstream, because you're right, Tim, it does continue to create data, but you need to sort of show, and the fact that you can do these MVPs show very quickly that, hey, if you amassed it all, look at the variations we have in material, right? And this is a great one. And then you can start to harmonize that and actually intelligently, in a data-driven way, say upstream, you're going to do X, Y, and Z. And if not, and if the ERP system can't handle it because it's constrained to 25 characters and you need it to be 50, well then you can fix it downstream. But so often we have fallen into the trap of we gotta it's an ERP problem, but that's just never cost efficient.
Yeah, one of the things I even go up, a little bit further back, and when I don't see organizations having, as I was saying before, is they focus on people, process, and technology, and some other components, but a vision for what data is, for the organization, and if you can't even sort of describe what that is, it's very difficult to put any kind of plan in place. And so, what does data look like today, and what is it going to look like, a year, 2 years from now? and you talk about data lakes, et cetera, but what is that? I think a lot of organizations, they do their spend analytics and they say, well, that's my data, right? But there's not a comprehensive, strategy and, sort of vision around this. But, I think what's that?
It's a great point, because oftentimes that's what I'll throw at IT, because when they're throwing roadblocks, I'll say, well, why don't you tell me what the data is that, and they'll look at you like, no, you're supposed to tell us. I'm like, right.
That's absolutely true. Absolutely true.
Yeah.
It's really hard on people. I think that's one of the things, that the data problem, because you're trying to run a function, you're trying to provide service, you're trying to do, probably a dozen or 100 things at once that rely on the data, and people have to do backdoor things to figure it out so that they can execute what they need to execute, while at the same time, you put your best people on hard problems. So they're out trying to do that, and it's like, okay, we need to cleanse this, and we have a good data strategy, but running the business, transforming while transforming your data, doing that all at the same time is incredibly hard on people, because it's, as you can imagine. So I think there are a lot of things hard on people in transformation, and are going to be hard on people going forward. And that's where it makes sense, making a really good investment in partnering with somebody that you can get really good leverage from is a huge opportunity. And I think it's really important to know what those right investments are to make. And I mean, the MVP model is a great one. What do you? I'll leave it there.
We see this as prioritizing the use case, and what I think is important for customers is what are the CFO or the CEO talking about, right? If you relate it back, what are their top priorities, and if you can find solution, and then at the same time, to your point, what is your internal customers are dealing with, and what's their priorities? If you're able to build solutions around that, but having data visibility up front to be able to turn the light on to your supplier base, and answer those basic questions that you should be able to answer, but you can't right now, even if you've invested millions of dollars in software, is key to, getting that visibility, seeing the opportunities, be able to take action. And there's no easy work, right? And we know that was a big topic of what we talked about before in our last discussion. So we have other questions. I knew this was going to happen. I'm like, I could just throw one question and we're going to get going, and we're already running out of time. And so we got 8 minutes, and we can do this again. We'll definitely do a write-up as well. So we'll circle back. So if there's more that you want to build into the discussion today that you want to add, we'll build a paper around this, because I do think and we'll continue the conversation. This is just the beginning. And so I really, really appreciate you guys taking the time to join us. So one question, and if you have questions, if you want to raise your hand, let me see if I can see. If you want to raise your hand, or just maybe pose the questions, and then I'll let you speak. But we have one question. So Ernie Hernandez is asking Tim if you're planning on sharing your wine. So that's just, Ernie.
Absolutely not.
You do have to
Do I look like a sharing kind of guy? Really?
Just virtually, right?
Right.
You have to go to Saskatoon to get the wine, so that's the only catch. But there's
Beautiful place to be right now.
Okay, so Steve asked, a company may ask, it is a difficult task to work on a strategy plan for category management when it comes to industries with diverse supplier portfolios, such as the oil and gas and energy sector.
Especially right now.
Yeah. I mean, I have several oil and gas clients, and I mean, I think, well, again, back to the sustainability, piece, that's something. I mean, certainly it's a hard. That's the consumer, like as Tim was saying, right? That's the consumer, drag on the business, but at the same time, sustainability, when things ramp up again in whatever way they do, the sustainability piece and the CSR really are going to play a role.
And this is one of the spaces where, if I'm a procurement leader, I'm saying, number one, my CEO and CFO do not care as much about procurement as I care about it. I have to know what are they strategically thinking about, and what they're thinking about is in Canada where we are, there's going to be if there's 5 refineries in Western Canada, in 2035 there's 3. What does it mean for my business? What does it mean for my customer? How do I add value? And as to make sure we're one of the 3, how do I align what we do to be able to connect to what they're thinking about? They're thinking about liquidity. How do I survive at $35 oil? How do I, but how do I make sure that we drive the right value conversations to survive? I think that's the, and what suppliers are going to be there for us to help us do that. And if we have to rethink models, who's best positioned to do that? How do I find them? There's going to be a lot of churn. This is as the water goes out. There's a lot of suppliers not going to be around in oil and gas that have been.
Yeah, actually what I'm seeing is we do a lot of work in oil and gas, and we're actually seeing, and I think I used the term compassion before, in terms of some of these supply chains being much more collaborative and working together, and we have seen that in oil and gas as well, in terms of some of the supply chains coming together, potentially with some of their contractors, where it's more labor based, and saying, what, we're going to work. We know this is a difficult time. There's going to be no margin. We're just going to keep the lights going because it's a critical supplier to them. And we're going to cooperate and try to make things work because we got to keep the viability of the supply chain going forward. Not every supplier, but at least those ones that you look at and say, when there is a restart, and depending on how fast that happens, am I ready to go do that? And it's an interesting question. As companies, we've seen a lot of restructuring in terms of companies balancing their costs and the sort of their business in terms of the new reality potentially in their revenues, et cetera. How do they make those adjustments without going too far? That depending on what kind of recovery we have, that we're able to take advantage of it. So.
Every sector, this is not just oil and gas, this is all sectors. And we've heard some terrible things coming out of, our suppliers who've been, not paid and they needed that cash, or just told them that, suddenly whatever they were producing is not going to be now needed, or, a lot of relationship have been destroyed through this long-term relationship, and the repair will be another interesting topic to be had.
That's certainly an implication for oil and gas. And I think, Tim, you were alluding to that, but the entire downstream supply, I don't mean upstream, downstream, but I mean, the tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, they're gonna really, both in upstream and in downstream struggle, I think, because it's a specialized service. It's, and it's gonna be hard to restart that industry.
Retail's been hit equally like that. Well,
consumer discretionary has been wiped out, and it's just, this is the fundamental that's going to drive, there's no new normal. The new normal looks very different than the old normal, and how do you best anticipate how to add value there? I think it's so industry specific, I think, to the point.
Yeah. Well, you could probably have this discussion on each industry, because there's going to be certainly a bifurcation of because if you're in healthcare right now, your outlook, you might be under duress, but your outlook looks pretty good. So.
If you're in data and digital and tech and automation, I think you're in a good space.
I find it interesting. I think supply chain visibility, supply chain data. We've seen, we more than doubled our pipeline in the last 10 weeks. We're still seeing how that convert into revenue, because budgets are, so we're adapting and finding different ways that we can get in the door and help our customers build a business case for investing in data early. And the other thing that's encouraging is I'm invited right now to speak at a lot of different events that are non-procurement related. My law firm, IP law firm, just invited me to present to executives of all their customers talking about supply chain and what are the trends. And that to me is encouraging, that CEOs and CFOs and CIOs are going to start really caring about data, caring about supply chain, and that ties into procurement. And if procurement can show the value of how it enable the supply chain and enable all the other functions, I think we positioned ourselves as a procurement function to be a strongly valued add partner. If we stay in the antiquated ways of doing things, we're just going to get in the way. because
let me
Can't
ask-
waste this moment. The risk of wasting this moment. I mean, this is the moment,
yeah.
and we have to take it. We have to. Take it.
How many and Tim, you can answer this, but it's also proverbial. How many calls do you think went directly from the CEO or the chairman down to the CPO throughout the last 2 months? Right. I mean, that probably number of calls to, went like through, if they even occurred before, right?
Yeah. Well, what's even more is that, just the companies that are, CPOs that are now participating not only at the executive committee level, but at the board level. So
Right.
now supply risk has become a board level concern, and they're being invited to talk about that, what they are doing, et cetera. So it's gotten a significant amount. Even my kids now can know what the supply chain is.
Yeah.
Just, how much visibility it's gotten since the beginning of the year. So.
yeah. So we got one more question. We're out of time, so I don't know if we can do this fast enough. As someone fairly new to the topic of procurement, are there any data sets useful as a market comparison tool for topics such as spend and lead time analytics? So that's a big answer. So what I would say, Garrett, is we'll follow up with you on some suggestion, and then we'll do that. It'll be easier. But listen, thank you. We're 1 o'clock. I knew this was not nearly going to be enough time, and I could speak, and we could all talk about this all day. We're all incredibly passionate about this function, and what's happening in the marketplace is a huge opportunity. So thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone
Thank you.
enjoy. Please provide
Absolutely.
your feedback on LinkedIn so we can do more of this. If we get good feedback and you guys share, we'll continue investing in those kinds of sessions.
Okay, take care. Have a good day.
Thank you.
All right.
That was great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.